discussion with all of you after the talk is over. So today we have a very interesting speaker with us. She is Dr. Kokil Jaitka. She is our very own assistant professor within the department. And she's also a principal investigator at the NUS Center for Trusted Internet and Community. She's particularly interested in examining the role of social media platforms in enabling self-presentation and social behavior. And the title of her talk today is Estimating Geographic Subjective Well-Being from Twitter, a comparison of dictionary and data-driven language methods. So I am going to pass the mic over to Kokil, and she can get started with her talk.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Shan. Yes, you can see my video. Can you see my screen? You can see my screen?
All good.
Okay, awesome. Hi. Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for taking time out for this talk. And thank you, Shan, for the lovely introduction. I do expect that this talk will be interesting to you if you are generally an active user of social media and want to know what you're telling the world about yourself. But also this talk is relevant if you have worked with or you're planning to work with social media data for your research. And also if you're in the area of natural language processing. That is, you do measure sentiment analysis. You do measure sentiment from language and maybe social media data. Or you're thinking about how to scale up your work to measure populations. Okay, so let me give you a little bit more context to this research. So my work is in the area of computational social science or computational approaches to social science. And some of my recent work has reported on how analyzing user behavior online contributes to the theoretical understanding of their lives offline. In the context of health, for example, my work with Google search volume and Twitter posts has shown that information-seeking behavior on Google provides lifestyle and cultural insights into community, and such as community health and chronic diseases, while information-sharing behavior, disclosure, such as what we'll talk about today, on Twitter and other social media platforms, reveals the psychological underpinnings of ill health and well-being. So in order to make these connections from language to personality traits or to health, I draw upon psychology and communication theories to understand this relationship. For instance, personal expression on social media is usually associated with people's need for belonging. That is, individuals who are more likely to use, individuals who are more likely to use collective pronouns and measure their and mention their significant others on social media are also more likely to be healthier and to feel in control of their lives. Of course, this would be true at a population level, but if you ask me tomorrow that I do this, is that true? It's a difference of precision and the level at which you measure things. But anyway, let's talk about this study. Why would we want to measure, why would we want to use social media to estimate well-being? I mean, aren't surveys good enough? Well, first of all, a survey from 10 years ago, like a census, is not going to tell you how people are coping with the pandemic. What I mean to say is that the current scenario has shown us that there is sometimes a real need for dynamic data collection. In situations where face-to-face contact is not possible or surveys aren't regular, social media-based methods can provide more recent estimates with better coverage for real interventions. A very real application of social media data was reported in this study, in this recent paper, where they showed that social media connections on Facebook, that is, who you're friends with and how many social connections exist between different regions in the United States, can predict the spread of COVID-19 and controlling for all other confounds. So what the authors showed was that the social connectedness index was predictive of actual mobility, because you'll go out to see your friends, and mobility had a causal relationship with COVID spread. So you see, social media analysis can lead to actionable insights that drive policy and interventions in the nick of time, which is slightly hard to do with surveys. Not just that, social media analysis has the advantage if you consider the cost of these surveys and the low geographic coverage from survey-based methods. For example, this particular study that I'll talk about today uses survey responses from Americans collected between 2009 to 2015, under the Gallup Share Care Wellbeing Index. So even with 1.73 million responses, there isn't sufficient data to study more than half of the counties in the United States. And that's because we set a very stringent limit on how many responses had to be included to be considered a regional estimate of well-being. But what if you don't study health? Is social media data still useful for you if you're a scientist? Well, a Pew study recently found that most people are getting their news from social media. More people are choosing their partners on social media. Social media penetration is so high that 1 in 6 people is on social media. So if your work involves understanding people in any way, the ethical use of social media data can be your resource towards actionable behavioral insights and good research. Okay, so now, of course, coming back to my study, other studies have had the idea that you can measure or estimate regional well-being or other measures from social media. So why was there a need for this study? Well, one of the reasons was inconsistent findings, because some studies have reported the use of positive emotion words correlates negatively with better health. And that is completely counterintuitive. We do expect that places where people post more happy things are likely to be doing better in life. So that was confusing. But this is not true across all the studies, which happens because different approaches have followed different data collection and processing methods. So the performance is really hard to compare. You can't say what was working correctly. Was the method working correctly? Is it because the data set is different? Is it because the country is different? We just don't know what the reason is. And of course, most of these studies are done in language. Unfortunately, that's also a limitation of the current study, but I am trying to work with more regional languages now. All right. And the third limitation is that most of these methods for sentiment analysis that even computer scientists use, they were created to measure the sentiment either of a piece of text or of a person and a person's writing. What that means is there is no clear understanding of what happens when you try to aggregate the language of a lot of people to represent a region. Other areas of research, such as economics, talk about ecological confounds, where when you try to use the data of individuals to estimate the indicator for a population, there are usually problems. So nobody's really looked at those in the context of language on social media. So these were the research gaps. And the main takeaways of this paper are the following. Of course, previous work has shown that well-being and health can be predicted from the language of social media posts. This study shows that geolocated social media posts can be used to estimate regional indicators of well-being and health using supervised machine learning methods on language. Some of the errors observed in the simpler methods are driven by socioeconomic differences driving word use. And we'll delve a little more into that in the coming slides. All right, so what were the methods used? Let me talk about that really quickly. All right, so the methods we wanted to compare was a whole lot of word level methods, which are created by psychologists and annotators who are given a list of words, and they score the words according to their sentiment, according to the best understanding they have of the sentiment of the word. While there are supervised methods, on the other hand, which try to infer the implicit sentiment of individual words by using label data at the sentence level. That is, you have a whole sentence and you have some label on whether it's happy or sad or angry. And using that score over a large data set, then computer scientists try to infer the sentiment of individual words. So they get a list of words with weights, and usually that tends to work better than word level methods because it captures the implicit association or the implicit sentiment of words like cozy, which may not exist in word level methods. Similarly, individual level methods take the inference one step further. So here the implicit assumption is that really happy people are mostly going to say really happy things on social media. I admit that's a flawed assumption, but in looking at the average vocabulary of people, Yes, it seems to work. If you take all the language of somebody and you score it based on how happy the person reports themselves to be, it generally provides a good way to infer the weight of the individual words they're using. And this tells us that words like family and holiday are highly positive. But also words like homework are highly positive. So there's a problem there, which we'll get into. Finally, county level methods. If you already have the regional vocabulary uh, uh, of a country and you already have its well-being estimates, then you can train models directly on the language of these regions itself. And that's called a county level method. So that would give you a different set of weights as compared to this or this or this. It will give you a slightly different set of weights to infer the well-being of a place based on the language of all its residents. So our task in this paper was to see which of these methods did the best at estimating well-being. Of course, because of the nature of progress, we did expect that supervised methods would do better than word-level methods, but we were surprised in some ways, which is why it's a good idea to keep listening to this talk. So these are the methods used, but of course, for a real study, for a real benchmarking study, you need a good source of data that's valid. And so here I can talk about my data. So we used 1.73 million responses to the Gallup ShareCare Wellbeing Index for 2009 to 2015. This gave us regional estimates of well-being for 1,208 counties in the United States. Admittedly, because such extensive survey data was available to us for the United States, this study does focus on United States. We also had the social media data for the same time period, 1.5 billion English US county map tweets from a 10% Twitter sample between 2009 to 2015. We also did a replication evaluation on a later date. So I just put that in here for completeness sake. Regarding the ethics of using this data, of course, social media data on Twitter is public. So we used only the public tweets. Additionally, we used tweets only where people had voluntarily disclosed their geolocation. Of course, this creates a sampling issue, but we do address that, as you will see in the coming slides. So I'd like to talk about the data pipeline really quickly to show you how we came to 1,208 counties, US counties, from the total 3,142 counties in the United States. So first, we excluded those counties which had fewer than 100 Twitter users per county with at least 30 posts per user. So we wanted to make sure that this wasn't a one-off measurement. That gave us about 2,000 counties for which we had enough people and enough words spoken by them. That is definitely the crux of a lot of studies of people and their language. You need to have enough people and you need to have enough words they've spoken in order to have a sensible effect size. So with 2,039 counties, we then looked at for how many of them we had Gallup responses, enough Gallup responses. So at least 300 people should have answered the Gallup well-being survey. And that made us exclude some more people. And finally, we had sufficient Twitter and Gallup data to look at 1,208 counties. Okay, and this was over 2009 to 2015. All right. So what exactly does it mean when we use language to predict well-being? Well, it looks something like this. What you're looking at here is a Pearson correlation of the frequency of each of these words across the 1,200 counties and their Gallup happiness score, right? So this is a correlation between word frequency and happiness, considering counties to be the unit of analysis. So the N is 1,208. The size of the words that you see here reflects the strength of the correlation, and the frequency is reflected in the deepness of the color. So what this essentially means is the words that are most correlating with happiness and the most frequent are words like fun and great and thanks. And the words that are most correlating with happiness but are not so frequent are words like appreciation and fabulous and entertaining and values. Values is quite light in shade. All right. So our machine learning models were able to take all these individual word weights into, of course, these become the weights in a linear regression model, and that's how we can predict for an unseen set of counties that are not included in the training set. We can predict what their happiness will be, and the evaluation becomes the correlation of that predicted score against Gallup happiness, right? So that is how the supervised machine learning methods work. For the other methods that involved word level weights, we calculated the predicted Gallup happiness and we correlated it the same way across all the counties. I hope that's starting to make sense. What I'm trying to impart to you in this slide is how word frequencies on social media can act as the independent variables in your regression equation. All right, so the main result of this work is one that just states the obvious. That is, definitely dictionary methods are not great at predicting life satisfaction and happiness. Although that was expected, we didn't expect them to do so badly. So what you see here is that positive emotion measured using Luke, which is like the best dictionary in the sense it's the most flexible. It has a lot of categories. It's psychologically validated. No computer scientist just came up with it, right? And it's been used for like over 20 years. That dictionary did so badly at predicting life satisfaction, happiness, worry and sadness, because you'll see that higher positive emotion scores is actually correlating positively with worry. Yeah, we were like, what's going on here? The negative emotion dictionary of Luke did seem to work, but this one completely failed, and I'll talk about what modified means in just a minute. On the other hand, of course, the data-driven or the supervised methods did much, much better. These are methods that are based on inferring word weights from sentence level annotations using supervised machine learning models. And here we see, this is WWBP is something that was created in-house at the University of Pennsylvania. Swiss chocolate was created, Swiss chocolate was the best performing supervised method in a sentiment evaluation shared task worldwide. This is something that we developed. So we had people tell us how they were feeling, how they were doing in life, and then using their language, we trained a separate model. And this is direct prediction using the language of counties. Overall, this slide shows you one basic trend, that word level methods, including Luke and LabMT, which is another really good method, they don't work so well, and data-driven methods work really well. These are supervised machine learning methods work really well. They are correlating strongly and correctly with happiness. So we see that life satisfaction and happiness are correlating with positive measures, which is a good thing. It's what we wanted. And if you use all the language of the counties, then you can do even better. You get a very high correlation. So this is the main result, but of course, one result is not enough, not for this study, not for any study, definitely not to make it into PNAS. They did ask us for multiple revisions to ensure that our results were robust, and we were happy to comply. A few of the things we tried was, well, maybe Gallup's outcomes are the problem. So we tried census level outcomes to see if the same results hold, especially the negative correlations, right? These are problematic. And we found that the results were still consistent and supervised methods were the best, and Luke wasn't doing well at all. The second, by time period. They're like, hey, you have collapsed 6 years, 7 years into one data set. How do we know that this is even legitimate? And how do we know that your results are even valid? So what we did was we divided our data set into different years, and we did the same evaluation for 2012 to 2013, and also for 2015 to 2016, which was not included in our data set. And we showed them that it's still valid. We also used models that were trained on one part of the data, on another part of the data, to show that there was no imbalance in the data that was driving these results. And the third is, of course, endogeneity. It is possible, and it's obvious, that both social media behavior and life satisfaction are driven by something else, income, right? So we also tested on, we also controlled for other obvious demographic covariates, such as age, that is the average age of a population, the race, and the income and the education. And I will talk about that on the next slide, what we found. So the first thing we found was that the results are generalizable. They generalize to other health outcomes and person level analysis. So of course, we also wanted to check whether Luke is just not working for measuring counties, or is it even failing for measuring individuals in a very similar structured analysis. The other thing we found was that the results are valid. There's little change in the results if we reweight the data to be representative of the census. Of course, that's another obvious concern. Not everybody is on social media, and only people of my generation are on social media. And when we control for most demographic confounds. So here I'd like to highlight that in fact, it's the language that captures, that overlaps heavily with socioeconomic variations in places. What that means is that when we controlled for the average per capita income of the counties, our results went away. They went away for everything except happiness, where language models were still able to predict were still able to predict happiness after controlling for differences in socioeconomic status. All right. This is an important point to keep in mind, because language is not just what people say, but also how much money they make, unfortunately. Results are stable. They replicate on smaller analysis, for example, 2012 to 2013, and later data, for example, 2015 to 2016. All right, so we've got to this point. We did a bunch of other tests, which I can get into, or you're welcome to read the paper. So we've got to this point, but we cannot leave off just yet. We have to try to understand what's happening, why it's happening, why one of the methods that's the most trusted, most reliable is failing. Which is why we did an error analysis, focusing mainly on the word level methods. Now I'll tell you why we focused on these methods. We focused on Luke because we highly admire Luke, and it's been the foundation of a lot of the psycholinguistic work, or all of the psycholinguistic work in my field. And we evaluated LabMT because, unlike Luke, which you could argue was made in the 1980s or 90s, and it's fallen out of fashion with how people use social media today, LabMT was actually developed on Twitter, using the most frequent words on Twitter, and by asking Twitter users to annotate them. So we wanted to know why they were failing, even though these methods are so legit. So let's talk about what we did. The first thing we did was we looked at which were the words in these dictionaries that were causing problems. This is like opening the hood of a car and looking at what could be going wrong. I showed you this part of the figure earlier. Now I'm showing you the other part, which is within the Luke dictionary, for example, these words are included. So Luke has words like LMAO, LOL, and so on. But we found that they were correlating negatively with happiness. And that was surprising to us. We really didn't expect that. So the most frequent words, in fact, the most frequently found words on Twitter were these LOL, LMAO, LMFAO, and so on. And all of them were correlating negatively with county happiness. Okay, so this gave us an actionable way to improve our measurement. We could just throw these words out and everything would be all right. Errors, so these are the errors due to frequent words. Some frequent words are driving the unexpected negative correlations with happiness. And here is what I mean when I say positive modified. When we took out just 3 of the most frequent words that were causing negative correlations, we immediately found that there was an improvement in the positive measurement. While of course this is specific for this context, perhaps, this does tell you that in order to get the right measurements for your context, it could be helpful to look under the hood and to see what might be driving your work astray. All right, the next thing we tried to do was, okay, so there are these words, but we also know that we're doing some geographic estimation. Is there like a geographic pattern in how these errors are happening? And yes, we did find that. This map shows the relative frequency of false Luke positive emotion words across the United States. What this means is words like LOL, LMAO, the words that are positive emotion according to Luke, but are correlating negatively with happiness, they are most likely to be found in the South. All this tells you is that there's a geocultural variation in how people use language. And this could be driving some of the correlations as well. So these are the errors due to geocultural differences. Different regions of the United States use words differently on Twitter. And of course, you can start to see that not just is there a geocultural difference built in, but also possibly a socioeconomic difference because it's areas in the north and on the bay. So in the US, different areas, probably different cities are associated with usually and surprisingly with more negative emotion words and higher happiness, usually because they have more money. Okay. So here's one way in which these words are being used differently, and it's right in front of you. According to Luke, which we decided to look at more closely to try to figure out what the errors were. According to Luke, these words that you see here are included both in their positive emotion category and in their work and net speak categories. And you'll see that they have a very different association with happiness. So more discussion of work on Twitter is associated with greater happiness, and more discussion of more language, informal language like NetSpeak is associated with lower happiness. But they're both a part of the same scale for measuring positive emotion. So contextual differences in word use is also driving some of the errors in measurements with positive emotion. And that's what this point says. NetSpeak basically covers a lot of speech acts. So mostly when we use LOL, we're not really laughing out loud. Mostly when we use haha, we might be being sarcastic and so on. So here's a summary of the error analysis. We noticed three main kinds of errors. Errors due to frequent words that could be fixed. Errors due to geocultural differences can't really be fixed. And errors due to context, which can definitely be fixed. All right, I am going to start to wrap up now. In summary, supervised language models work on regional estimates because they capture socioeconomic variation. I'd like to emphasize that the socioeconomic variation actually helps them do better. So if they assign the word work and homework a higher positive weight, even though objectively we know that's not true, it actually goes in their favor. Of course, word level methods such as Luke that are based on psychological scores aren't able to do that. The second point is that the language of regions differs culturally and socioeconomically, and this can cause simpler word level methods to fail. Finally, differences can be corrected by spotting and deleting high frequent multi-context words, as I showed you. So what are the implications of this work? Well, unfortunately, it's correlational, not causal. Just if you start using the word fabulous on social media a lot, it's not automatically going to make you feel happier. But it is a way to understand how people are doing. If done in the right way and in future work, you can establish causality of a different sort. And in recent work that was also published in PNAS by my colleagues, they have shown that before people get a diagnosis of depression, their language on social media can predict whether they will get it or not. So this study was done by asking people who were visiting hospitals to share their social media history, and their diagnosis was recorded. Emotion-focused approaches can underreport on cultures which use less emotional language. What does this mean? This means that this approach may not be best for all contexts or all populations. So definitely that should be kept in mind. Findings will change as regional language patterns change. Of course, you saw how closely this work is driven by the socioeconomic variations and the differences in language use. Actually, language is evolving all the time. What's in vogue now to express something might become a symbol tomorrow and then just fall out and become obsolete day after. So findings will change as regional language patterns change. Finally, the evaluation framework sets the standard for replication validity of social media-based analysis. Even if the findings might keep changing, we do expect the results to be consistent because the overall trend of well-being doesn't change so much from year to year. From 1 year to 10 to 15 years later, yes, it will change. All right, and that's my time. Thank you very much for your attention. I'd be happy to take questions now. If you'd like to know more about the research I'm doing at NUS, you can check out our work on corona. You can contribute to our research. Thank you to the research sponsors, and thank you so much for your attention.
Okay, thank you so much, Kokil, for the presentation. So we're opening this up to the floor at the moment. So if you have any questions at all, please feel free to either type it into the chat function of Zoom, or you can also raise your hand and we can then call on you. Okay, so as everyone ponders about the questions that they're going to put together, Kokil, I do have one question for you. So I think it's quite interesting, essentially the whole basis of your research, and that I'm noticing as well that it's based within the US context. So do you think that a study like that is able to be replicated within the Singapore context or within Asia? And how would you expect the results to vary?
That's a great question. I am collecting social media data from Singapore. Unfortunately, only about 1 million people in Singapore are on Twitter, and they're not that regular in posting. So I'll have to see whether it pans out or not. In multilingual contexts like Singapore, definitely the challenges will be more interesting. And this analysis and a similar analysis has been replicated with Weibo data. That is, of course, a Chinese data set by my colleagues. It has been replicated. By replicated, I mean the general framework for analysis has worked in Spain and Mexico as well. So there is evidence that it works on Spanish and Mandarin. And I am very eager to see whether it works in Singapore as well.
All right, thank you. I do believe we have some other questions as well.
Yeah.
Kokil, I think there's one in the chat box.
Yes, I'll take it. So the question from Abdullah is, how do you see the happiness or sentiment analysis with time, since the time factor might affect the sentiment too? That's a great question. And in fact, in other work, we have seen that people are really happy on Saturdays and really sad on Mondays. So definitely it varies from week to week as well. But when you average it over a long period of time, things average out. So the whole point of collecting all the data and leaving nothing is to make sure we are not cherry picking. That is usually the strength of machine learning models. But that's a great question. Definitely the time factor affects the sentiment, but overall the sentiment trends remain consistent. Okay, I can take the next question. The next question is from Purnima. Hi, Dr. Jetka. What are your thoughts on making the use of emoticons, photos, or images and GIFs in tweet along with text into consideration? That's a great question. Of course, I can only do one thing, but definitely there are my colleagues who have looked at the use of emoji and its implications for well-being. Emojis are a very powerful way of communicating, and I can't wait to get into that in future work. Just haven't got there yet. Okay, so Christy has a question. You can unmute and ask. I think Yufan, you'll have to okay, try now.
Yes. Thank you for your presentations. I saw this because my background is in psychology. I think
Okay, great.
what you're using is in the carrots and the scheme is under, I think, one of the psychologists at Stanford University. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Yeah, it's a meaningful research, I think. So because we can use it for measure the mental health impact. Yeah, and also linked to the what you mentioned about the
I think we lost you. Oh,
and also,
okay.
yeah, the scalable mental health care. So it's for future needs. I think it's important. However, I think when we apply this in Asia context or Singapore context, there is a language barrier. And may I know, will you also consider about like the phone data location to access?
That's a great question. You've made some two really good points. One is whether it works in the Singaporean context. Fortunately, I don't have to try to solve all the problems. I do have some great colleagues here in Singapore who have worked on creating really good sentiment analysis methods specifically for Singlish, and I have applied them in work where I've looked at how. Sorry, Christy, you're mute again. Sorry. But let me try to finish answering your question. So definitely, yes, there are contextual methods that can work in the same framework to understand different regions. And that would be the way forward. Your second question is to look at phone mobility data. Definitely, that is something that Facebook allows access to. I'll have to see whether it falls within the purview of Singapore's privacy norms and whether it gets IRB approval before I include any such data. I want to make sure that it's ethical. Thank you for that.
In other questions, what is associated with the strongest negative emotion from all your analysis to your entire process?
Negative emotion. It's
The AI.
yeah. So the words that are associated with negative emotion, and I apologize for the language, are these words in this corner. Boredom causes low happiness, so be careful and don't get bored. It's also people who or regions which have higher usage of abusive words. Hope that helps. Yeah, this is a lot happening here. I showed you this left part last time. Yes, I am screen sharing. So I showed you this left part last time, and we can do the same thing with the negative emotion words which are in this corner and in this corner. And we find that again there are some words, the more complex words that reflect more complex thinking and kind of a middle class or a sophisticated education, are actually predicting higher happiness, even though they are negative words. Hope that helps. All right. So the next question is from Reena. Hi, I was wondering how such a study could account for the emergences of culture-specific slang. Great question. As machine learning might not be able to detect sarcasm, irony, and socio-cultural context, how would we manually adjust for these issues? Okay, good question. I think any study is as good as its measures. So while supervised machine learning methods work so well because they use the power of a lot of data, if you're theoretically interested in measuring a context, I would suggest narrowing your focus to a particular psycholinguistic construct. So my way of answering your question, Reena, is if you're studying cultural diffusion through language, then just stick on the words that reflect cultural diffusion and look at how they are used across time and space. And there's some really interesting work in that area by Jacob Eisenstein. I can point that to you later if you email me. So there is work which has looked at these sociocultural contexts, and definitely machine learning things have this problem. They can't detect these things. But again, there are some very talented colleagues of mine in the NLP community who are working on finding these out so that we can identify these words and not let them confound our analysis.
Kokil, so just to alert you to two hands that have been raised,
Okay.
Jack and Colleen have raised
All
their
right.
hands. Yeah.
Okay, thanks for, I've now opened the participant list as well. Jack, I'd be happy to take your question. And then I'll get to the ones in the chat. So Jack, whenever you're ready. You might have to unmute Jack, Yufan.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, perfect.
Okay, thank you. This is really fascinating work. I enjoyed, the study very much. And the one follow-up question, comment, and also one question. I think, I agree with previous colleagues who talk about non-English Twitters. I think not just in, Singapore, but also I think in the US, in recent years from the census data, we know that the population is becoming more and more multilingual. And if you look at the most spoken foreign languages at home in the US.
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah, so actually quite a few of them are Asian, like Chinese,
Absolutely.
no surprise.
Yeah,
Tagalog and the Vietnamese
yes.
are very high. So I think maybe from the corpus of Twitter data, we can, of course, the Asians living in the US might be still different, okay, from those.
Absolutely. In fact, thank you so much for bringing this up. This is a point I bring up in the text of my paper as well, that that the Asian language communities that are so numerous and they're such a sizable part of the population, they are completely ignored, or they do not express, or they have a different way of expressing themselves culturally, which is why they would not be captured. The role of any good research is to highlight these issues. In my supplement, I go deep into how the language and the negative correlations, they are biased against the African American community as well. While I can't solve the problem in the US, and I can't solve all the problems everywhere, definitely my goal in the coming years is to look more carefully at these multilingual variations and how, and what they mean when cultures interact with each other. Thanks for the great question.
Right. No, that was my comment. My question is actually about the supervised machine learning.
Yes.
And can you tell us more? Because I was trying to go find the paper on this website, but I could only see some survey. I couldn't find the paper, but I wanted to read more. But then from what I understand, like supervised machine learning is actually where, okay, it's different from the unsupervised, where things are more automated. So in supervised machine learning, actually the trainer for the data set, okay, I think they're also like a linear, non-linear, okay, but supervised machine learning, but then the trainer is really crucial. Like, can you tell us who are the trainers who press the button for the machine learning process? And
that is an excellent question. Thank you so much. So your question is about the trainers, or basically, yeah. So again,
and could this also, like, because you showed there are for the South, okay, that map was shocking. Okay, there are much higher error rates among the South. Is it because there's nobody in the trainer who came from the South?
That is so astute of you. And yes, that is one of the reasons. The people who created the word level methods were people usually who live in cities in the north.
Right.
So they did things like so of course in the US and in urban areas, being a conservative is considered a bad thing. So they did things like they labeled the word conservative with a negative score and the word Republican with a negative score, even though it's completely a biased decision. And we found these errors were reflected in our analysis. So it definitely depends on who is annotating the data. So the thing is, if you use those approaches, if you get people to label data, annotator biases are possible. If you train the data against some other labels and not against people's evaluations of words, you can overcome these biases, these annotator biases, and that's what we show that we do. But then you have socioeconomic biases. That's why places which have higher per capita income, such as the Silicon Valley, would be using more words like puke and hungover, but these words would end up showing higher positive emotion. Yes?
Yes, so potentially if, for example, we want to continue this and including more Southern input, okay, from the South, then like, I don't know whether we can do this from Amazon Mechanic Turk.
The right way, Jack, would be try to get context agnostic words. The right way is never, as long as we have people, there are going to be subjective biases. But one way out of this would be to find completely context agnostic words. And one example of that, yes, is something we cover in the paper. adjectives are always used in a certain way. So if you use words of a certain speech act and words that are context independent, then you can remove the biases associated with other kinds of words. But of course, then again, there is a trade-off. Yes.
Right. Yes. Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you so much. Thank you for the great question. Colleen, we can take your question next, and then I'll go back to the chat.
Hi, Gokul. Thank you so much for the presentation. I think it's really, really interesting. I just have a question based on maybe trends that you've observed through all your research.
Sure.
Personally, I thought that people who express extreme levels of happiness on social media may be experiencing something that, maybe they're hiding from social view. I'm wondering if you've seen this phenomenon and whether it's more present in Asian contexts, simply because I think it's in Asian culture to, put up a front in front of people. I'm just wondering what you think about this.
That's a great question. And definitely social desirability is going to be an issue. In more recent work, so yes, first of all, yes, but this is probably something that is observed and experienced by you in the Asian context. But yes, this is a worldwide phenomenon where definitely the pressure to look good and to be perceived as happy is so high on social media. And in fact, in recent work, I am trying to compare what people say on social media versus how they describe things that make them happy. And to see whether there is a real difference. And definitely I do already find differences amongst what people say makes them happy and what they're pretending to be happy on Twitter about. Yeah.
Okay, so to link on to that, I'm wondering if you've done any research on maybe celebrities where putting up a front is even more important?
Honestly, I haven't. I am doing, I'm working with a student who's writing up her honors thesis about influencers and how influencers are perceived. So not exactly what you're interested in asking about, but how they're perceived and how that affects people's self-perceptions.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Great questions. Thank you. All right, I'm going to go back to the chat. I have a question from Yuren Chin. Hi, Dr. Jedka. Similar to Rena's question, I found that you identified haha as a negative speak, but it may differ in different contexts, or maybe individuals have different habitual use of haha. How to cope with it? That's a great question. It depends on what level you're doing your analysis on and who is the population you are considering, right? So if you look at a population as disparate as a country, then definitely there are going to be differences in how it is used. So there are a few things. Well, I can't solve the problem for you without knowing what you're working on, but there are a few things you should keep in mind. What is the context? Is it emails you're looking at, or is it social media? What is the time period? Is it data from now or from 15 years ago where haha still meant happiness? Who is saying it? So is it 8-year-olds, 18-year-olds, or 60-year-olds? Because 60-year-olds would be more likely to use it to mean haha happiness. Okay, so that's the way you can think about answering your own question. And if it is about people, then you should make models that work for those people. Hope that answered your question. Great question. Next, from Sean, there was a question. Sorry, I missed it earlier. Hi, Prof. Was there a distinction made between personal and public official figure Twitter accounts and between human and bot tweets? I'm wondering if such a distinction could affect the analysis of happiness through social media. That's a great question. While we did have spam filters, so we did make sure that our data did not include any spam accounts. We did not, as far as I remember, distinguish between personal and public official figure Twitter accounts. Nevertheless, these accounts would, so if you consider the actual demographic, these accounts in a random sample account for less than 1% of the total data collected. So the results would still be valid, but that's a good question. Definitely something to check on. Okay, I do think I've covered the questions in the chat. Thank you for some really thought-provoking questions.
Okay, so would there be anyone else who would like to ask any other questions to Coco? All right, I see. I don't think there are any last questions here. So we are going to end off this particular session. Thank you very much, Dr. Kokil Jaitka, for your presentation. And thank you everyone for tuning in as well. Do look out for other notices, other announcements of the CNN Research Talk series that will be coming your way in the next few weeks. All right, thank you everyone.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone.